What up, YouTube? I'm Darren, and here I am on Neverforged. So first of all, apologies to Bob, who looks like he's very, very threatening at the moment. For the clickbaity title, this isn't about Bob having bad game design. This is about bad game design in general. And there's some examples from Bob of really good game design, and some examples of Bob from some mistakes I see a lot of people make, not just Bob. Wanted to cover that. Wanted to go through it and go through and give some advice on how to edit these things to make them make more sense. Yeah. So without further ado, here we go. Let's make Bob look a little bit less threatening.
Bludgeoning for blunt weapons, piercing for pointed weapons, and slashing for sharp-edged
By the way,
weapons.
if you haven't seen
D&D
this video
5e
yet,
uses
go
these
watch that
3 damage types
first.
to add flavor to each weapon in the game,
Yeah,
but that's it.
kind of your
Just
homework for
flavor.
this video.
Almost every monster with immunity or resistance to one of these 3 types has immunity or resistance to all of these 3
Yep,
types.
except for like skeletons.
Actually, Bob?
Yeah,
Skeletons and oozes, I know. There are
might be a
rare
few others.
exceptions where one type might be better to use than
This
another,
is why
but
in
even then,
my
it's only because
bounded hit
one
point
of the
system,
types is worse for.
so in my bonded hit point system, I allowed armor since you only have 24 hit points as a fighter with a 14 con forever. I was letting armor give you resistance to certain damage types. That meant like, oh, they're wearing mail. I'm gonna put the longsword down and pull out the spear. Oh, they're wearing plate. I have to pull out the warhammer. Oh, they're wearing padded or leather armor. It's sword o'clock, baby. So yeah, but you can't really give resistance to armor without um, limiting hit points, or else you're really gonna mess up everything. Like it's just gonna be a terrible mess. But anyway, let's go back to Bob.
Fighting a certain creature. So the top-sided differences between non-magical 5e weapons is that sometimes one type is exceptionally useless. We can do better than that. We can come up with some fun features to make these 3 damage types both more unique and more fun to use. And I actually did this a couple months ago,
Yep.
then I listened to your feedback, and now have 3 updated features to share with you, plus 1 cool optional move for all your 5e weapons.
So I had actually thought about releasing a video like this a couple months ago for the first one. Decided not to, partially because I didn't think they were worth salvaging. This, however, this stuff right here, this stuff right here, really hard to see what I'm doing in my video. This stuff right over here, this stuff is beautiful. This is just beautiful, beautiful game design for the most part. Minor issue, we got to see some minor issues, a small math issue, and then a pretty big issue, and then we're gonna throw some shade at WoTC for bad game design. So that's what we're doing here. If you've seen the video before, which again, hope you have, you'll see where I'm going with this. But here we go.
Because I'm Bob, this is where we learn how to have more fun playing D&D together, and I'm gonna put this away.
And I'm Darren. And this is where I mostly just play Skyrim to exercise, but I do some forays into D&D. I do play D&D a lot. I've been playing D&D since, yeah, longer than I'd like to admit to, because I don't want people to think I'm that old. Let's just say when second edition was new, was roughly when I started playing. So I played through second, third, fourth, which nobody likes to talk about, but there was actually some good stuff in fourth, just not the main game design, and of course fifth edition. So here we go. Also, I had taught high school physics for 4 years, ended up writing the test I had been teaching to for 4 years for the next 4 years, which is where I picked up a lot of editing skills. So a lot of this comes from working in assessment under a kind of what is it, under the pressure of, if there's a mistake in your test, everyone's going to know about it. It's going to end up in one of the local newspapers. I'm not going to mention which state I worked for, but you might be able to tell from the fact that they do publish all of their test results all the time. I then moved out to the Seattle area where I was a data scientist for a while, and I'm a business intelligence engineer. So I got the math, I got the science, I got the editing, got the D&D. Let's see if we can make this even more fun and less of an issue. There's a couple of issues. Let's just get into it.
Critically bludgeoning. With this mighty bludgeoning weapon, you can overpower your opponents.
So off the bat, he's going to talk about how he called this crushing originally. Critically bludgeoning just sounds so clunky. Just call it bludgeoning. All bludgeoning weapons have this property. If a weapon does bludgeoning damage, it has the following property. The intro's cool, but eh, unless you're only giving it to some weapons, which you should give it to all of them, just make it about the damage type. Anyway. So I'm just gonna call it bludgeoning from now on.
When you score a critical hit on a melee or ranged attack with this weapon against a creature, you can knock the target prone and push them 5 feet into an unoccupied space, provided you are proficient
Good.
with the weapon. If your attack would already move the target, use the total distance ending in an unoccupied space. The targeted creature must be no more than one size larger than you. I love this one because it adds movement. 5e
Yes,
combat is usually
yes.
completely static after the first round when
Movement
everyone
is
gets into
key.
position and then is
Make a
afraid to
move.
move
Push them
lest they
around.
suffer an opportunity attack. And most of you liked these elements from my original bludgeoning feature, crushing, but that feature required you to both crit and roll at least an 8 on your damage die, restricting the effect to big weapons only.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of you said, nah,
Well, again,
that
if we're
makes
doing
it
it to all
super rare to
weapons,
happen at all, and it
bludgeoning.
makes it so only strong weapons get even stronger. So this new version just requires a crit, and I changed the name to critically bludgeoning to make that more intuitive. However,
I would actually say let's not tie it into critical hits, and there's some reasons for this. Just say when you roll a natural 20 when attacking with this weapon, and you can put the target's no more than one size category larger than you. You can put that right at the beginning, do the whole thing, and then skip that part that you needed later for a reason that we're going to get into. Reason to not tie it into criticals. One D&D at one point said, "Hey, monsters can't crit." Now they're saying monsters can crit again. Who knows what they're going to do with that? Let's not tie it to criticals so that we can avoid any kind of mm, wonkiness to the critical system. Also, this is going to make crit fishing builds or crit increasing builds where you increase your crit range, that much more desirable and that much more powerful. And they're not going to balance as well as they used to because you have these new cool abilities that are tying into criticals. And there's the last one. Oh, yeah. And if you make the mistake as DM of giving your players adamantine armor, you're going to be like, haha, I get to knock you down. And no, you don't. I have adamantine armor. It's like, oh, God, fine. Just fine. So just say on a natural 20, you can avoid all those problems in one fell swoop. And then just change it to bludgeoning. Any weapon that does bludgeoning damage has the following feature. Done. And there's a bit at the end that's clunky. We're going to get into that.
I also changed it to require proficiency with the weapon because I
That's great.
felt that if a player character is going to knock down an ogre with a sling, they gotta be proficient with that sling and roll a crit.
Or a
And
natural 20.
despite what 1D&D is currently
Yeah,
recommending,
this was
I think
right
monsters should be
before.
able to do this too.
This was right before the drop of classes, and I'm really releasing this just after the drop of classes. He actually talks about that later. And in the comment section of this video originally, people were talking about, oh, it should be 20, so monsters can do it. So this monster should be able to do this too, which he's about to say.
Also, a few keen-eyed feat lovers out there saw some overlap between my original design for crushing and the 5e crusher feat, which
Yep.
also allows you to push a creature 5 feet into an unoccupied space provided the target is no more than one size larger than you with bludgeoning weapons. So I added that if your attack would already move the target, use the total distance ending in an unoccupied.
Okay, this right here is one of the examples of where editing comes into play. This is a rule, right? This in general, I'm pointing at it. You can't see my hands, but I'm pointing at it. This is a rule that you're adding to the game. Well, you're adding to the game. This is a more general situation than specifically having the feat crushing. While I agree that this should happen, what you should do is instead of writing it here, you should then put a note while while using the above, make the following change to the crusher feat when moving someone with this feat. If you roll a natural 20, this stacks with the 5 feet of movement and the knockdown from the bludgeoning, critically bludgeoning, whatever we're going to call it, feature. Move it outside, make it its own text. Feats are more specific than a generic rule. Also, it makes it clunky. Eh, and you want understanding in these because of the natural language focus that fifth ed has, unlike fourth ed's. Make it look like World of Warcraft focus. I'm just kidding. But the rules were just very, very game rule. It was game rules in all the abilities with the little red and green borders. This is natural language. Because you're using natural language, you want to avoid putting the exceptions into the generic rule. You want to push them outside. Just make it like a feat thing. Add the following line to the crusher feat rather than put it in the rule. That's all. Just make it easier to understand. Don't want to confuse your player base. And it made it feel clunky with that additional sentence, and you can just move that to the crusher feat, and then you're all set. And any other feat that does something similar, you can add that to it as an optional rule as well, instead of putting it just in the rule. It's just clunky. I don't know. That is where it's bad design, not from a game design perspective, or just from like a writing perspective, and from I guess a little bit of game design, because if WoTC was releasing stuff like this and they put it here instead of in the feet, that would be just really bad. Like, why are you doing this? And you should think the same way. Instead, just say, hey, add this line to the feet.
Space. So rather than interfering with each other, these effects will stack. And
Which,
before
yeah,
we
we
jump
want
into
that. We
piercing,
want that.
let me know in the comments what you think of this updated bludgeoning feature and whether or not you're really feeling these additional mechanics to get that dynamic cinematic
I am
combat.
actually feeling it.
I
That's why
gotta
I'm doing that.
recommend adding some flavorful descriptions from Describe.
Since Describe's not
Whether it
paying
is the
me
rush
and I'm not
from enduring a
monetized yet, I'm
bruise
supposed
or
to get that.
scratch,
But
or the
again, you
adrenaline from
probably went and
surviving a
watched his
wound,
video
the
and
pain
already
of being
watched this
hit,
Describe
gouging, or
ad,
critically
right? Right?
piercing. With this precise piercing weapon,
Okay. Critically pierce again. Just call it piercing.
you can exploit weaknesses in your opponent's defenses. Your melee or ranged attacks with this weapon score a critical hit on a roll of 19 or 20,
Ooh,
provided
changing the
your
crit range. I'm gonna stop right there. Changing the crit range affects the balance of this weapon against every other weapon in the game. And since you're only changing the crit range of this weapon, piercing weapons, I mean, if you compare a short sword to a scimitar, I think they both do 1d6. One's piercing, one's slashing. The short sword just gained, let's see, 3.5 divided by 20 is what? 0.175. Just gained 0.175 to its expected damage output. So every time you're attacking, you're doing almost zero point 0.2 damage more. So every 5 attacks, you're doing 1 point of damage. Doesn't seem like a lot, but that also depends on how you other people might calculate expected damage output differently, so I'm trying not to get too much into there. But you get one share of 3.5 damage more because you get that on a 19 and a 20 instead of just on the 20. So it's one share of 3.5 damage depending on how you calculate average damage. So that's a share of damage higher. Uh, Not. There's a reason that. Well, we'll get into that.
proficient with the weapon. If your attack would already score a critical hit on an attack roll of 19 or 20, use 18 to 20. The target of
And
this attack gains 1 wound and is bleeding. The targeted creature must have a distinct form capable of suffering these effects.
okay,
We'll talk about that bleeding part in a second, but I love
okay,
this one because it's reminiscent of the varied weapon
okay.
crits
I'm
we
gonna
had in.
stop here. I don't see it on screen. So hand axe. If you look at the top there, hand axe and short sword. They are actually balanced to each other. Believe it or not, because times 3 versus 19 to 20 times 2 is the same thing. Because if a hand axe on a 20, you get an additional 7 damage. 3.5 plus 3.5. That's the expected output of a d6. For a short sword, ignore the first. That's for small creatures. For a short sword, you get an extra 3.5 on a 19 and an extra 3.5 on a 20. Also, a boost of 7 to the expected damage, or a share, two shares of 3.5, and one share of 7, which is kind of like two shares of 3.5. Again, depends on how you calculate it. The only difference here is the hand axe did have a slightly higher damage output, only because if your strength was higher times 3. It changed because of where your ability modifier came into play. Um, they don't use ability modifiers to add to your critical damage in fifth edition, and I think actually they were probably planning on keeping this in fifth ed, and then they changed criticals to only include the dice, and then they didn't do this, but they kept criticals the same. So that's what I think was happening. But it is interesting to note that the 19 to 20 times 2 is balanced to the times 3 in terms of average damage output. It's just hand axes, you get it all at once. Short swords, you get it more often, but less. So it's kind of cool. And other weapons aren't balanced to it because they're just not as good. I guess swords are better than a sap. 1d6 3. No, that's supposed to be a. I think that's supposed to be a 1d4 3 and the 1d6 3. I don't think that's a d43. I think that was supposed to be a note. and then whatever wherever he got this from was just didn't do the formatting properly. So that's funny.
previous editions, and it makes sense that this pointed weapon should be better than blunt ones or long edge ones at finding those precise weak spots on a target.
But
Credit to one of my
critical
collaborators
design's
who
not
helped
really
redesign this
great,
one. Now, the original
but
version was called Impaling and resulted in levels of exhaustion,
yeah, that was bad.
but
Even
there
though
were some
exhaustion's better
solid
now.
critiques
So
in the comments about how
yeah,
exhaustion is
I
way
was one of those
worse for
solid.
PCs than for monsters.
I was one of them.
So we came up with a new
Okay, how
condition
exhaustion's worse than
that
PCs?
you've
Yep,
probably seen homebrewed before called bleeding. A
bleeding,
bleeding creature takes 1d4 piercing damage at the start of their turn for each wound.
which if a combat is typically 3 rounds, it means the creature's either bleeding for 1, 2, or 3 rounds. Call it 2, 2.5. So that's +5. That's one share of 5 damage. So it's +5 damage over 20 to the damage output. Or over 10, or +10 if you allow it on 19 or 20. So this is actually making that situation worse, and this is adding more damage to it. But this is cool, so I want to keep this. And I mean, the other one you knock people prone, so this one it's kind of. I I think it's fine to have this for piercing and knocking people backwards and prone for bludgeoning. Let me know what you think in the comments. I don't know. Then let Bob know what you think on his. It's his game design. I'm just talking about. Really, you should comment about why it's okay to increase critical range of one class of weapons and why that wouldn't cause everybody to use short swords and bows instead of hand axes and scimitars.
One creature can suffer multiple bleeding wounds simultaneously, and each instance of the condition must be ended separately. A creature can end one instance of bleeding by regaining at least 5 hit points, or when a creature uses their action to dress a wound with a successful DC 15 Wisdom Medicine check.
Okay, he doesn't talk about the regaining 5 hit points thing, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit here. Does that mean so? Okay, one instance goes when you regain 5 hit points. I would instead change that to whenever you receive healing, you lose you gain one fewer hit points from the healing, and it ends one wound. That's how I'd rate it. That's just me. Um, you can go either way, I guess. The 5 just seems a little weird. And the medicine check, I think he even just addresses it.
First and foremost, this condition is not one more thing the DM should be tracking for the PCs. I prefaced this part by writing, the player who causes the condition is responsible for recalling the subsequent damage rolls in a timely manner.
Either
In
way,
fact, you could ignore this part and just have fun with the expanded crit range, but the idea was to make those deep
I actually
wounds matter
prefer this to the
without
expanded crit
causing
range. The expanded crit range isn't
long-term
bad. I think
debilitating
this is good.
effects for player characters. One thing I'm not sure about is that DC 15 check for healing though. Should we lower that to 10?
Yes.
Let me know in the
Oh
comments.
yeah.
Now,
And so one interesting thing about that, most monsters in D&D, I mean, pretty much all monsters in D&D are going to bother to make a medicine check. Most monsters in D&D can't even make a medicine check. Like a direwolf can't stop to make a medicine check. So this really only this is going to affect the monsters way more than the PCs in this regard, which is great. The only issue was that somebody, forget who it was, but somebody once famously quoted that their view of when civilization started isn't when we started using tools and weapons, it's when they found human remains from like thousands of years ago with a mended bone, because it means that the rest of the tribe or group kept them alive, kept them with them long enough for their bone to mend. Medicine, healing each other and helping each other, is sort of the hallmark of civilization. And so civilized enemies should be able to do this, and it should be easy, and it should be fine. That's actually not a reason that it should be 10. It should be 10 because it's easier for the players to stop it, and that makes it better for the players. And if a monster happens to waste his action on a medicine check, great. Action economy. We just one action economy. And of course, if monsters can heal, then they can heal, and they're annoying anyway, so it's all good. Just stepping over.
critically slashing. With this
Okay,
fearsome
this
slashing
one.
weapon,
This one is a mess. I'll explain why it's a mess when it gets there.
you can slice multiple opponents at once. When you score a critical hit on a melee or ranged attack with this weapon against a
About a
creature,
20.
you can divide the total weapon damage among a number of nearby creatures equal to your proficiency bonus, provided you are proficient with the weapon. For melee attacks, new targets must be within your reach, including your available movement. For ranged attacks, new targets must be within your weapon's normal range. And I love this one because
Okay,
where
why do you love this
piercing
one?
crits are like a moment of clarity for precisely striking one small
This
target,
is the good thing about this.
slashing crits
And I want
are
to
like
save it for
having
this
that
reason.
moment of clarity reveal a path across
Yeah,
one target
yeah. This
onto another. This concept also came.
and there's a really much easier, much more simplistic, much more elegant way of doing this. Because the problem with the way that this was written, let's see if I can get back to it. Rewinding. Here we go. Problem with this is the way this is written is when you score a critical hit, or we'll change it to when you roll a natural 20, you can divide the total weapon damage among a number of nearby creatures equal to your efficiency bonus. You're introducing a lot of math into the situation. And all right, let's just say I'm gonna mention three players who may or may not be at your table. There's Dennis the dyscalxic. Dyscalculia. It's dyslexia is dyslexic. What is dyscalculia? Is it dyscalxic? I don't even know. But Dennis is bad at math for whatever reason. Maybe he's just bad at math. Maybe he's got dyscalculia. Dennis is bad at math. Then you got Opie. He's an optimizer. It's the name. And Chevy the cheater. OP, the optimizer, is going to take 20 minutes trying to figure out the exact way to divide his damage to get the most effect with all the creatures around. And that's going to be a problem. Dennis is going to take forever to figure this out. And Chevy is going to use those calculations and the forever taking of those calculations to take forever on his turn to try to trick you into doing more damage to more creatures than he actually can do. All of those cases are bad. Essentially, when someone rolls a natural 20, you want the rest of the table to be like, yeah, not, oh, come on. Now, John, he's gonna take an hour to figure this out. His turns are already so long, and now he's gonna be dividing all this stuff. And seriously, last time game I PC'd in, I played a rogue, and the just length of time it took people to run their turns was ridiculous. We had one of the other characters was monk. I did just as much damage as him, and my turns were about a tenth of the time. I'd be like, okay, I'm in position, sneak attack, here's my damage, done. And he'd be like, all right, here's my first attack, second attack, third attack, fourth attack. Adding another time crunch to sometimes already time crunchy turns, and this is going to happen with fighters and monks and things, people that get a lot of attacks anyway. It's going to come up more than once in a turn, possibly. You just don't want to add this math. But I have a solution. You said, let's get back
Including your available crits are like a moment of
clarity
clarity
for
for
like,
precisely striking
okay,
one
yeah, yeah.
small target.
He's talking about piercing right now.
Slashing crits are like having that moment of clarity reveal a path across one target onto another. This concept also.
Cross one target onto another. Let's go there. Let's keep the language about movement. We'll talk about the range stuff in a minute. Let's keep the talk about movement and reach. I like that. Gets the player moving. Bludgeoning forces movement onto the enemies. Slashing allows the critter to move, not fans of Critical Role, but the person making a critical hit. I mean, you could also be a fan of Critical Role. These are not mutually exclusive. In fact, there's a lot of overlap between these two groups, people making critical hits and fans of Critical Role. Anyway, I don't know why I'm talking so fast. I don't know what's going on. Don't I just nyeh. All right, but anyway, in order to have this path of clarity, so keep that language, but instead of dividing the damage up, because again, bludgeoning, I've added the prone condition to my creature. I've cut your speed in half next turn, and I've given my allies advantage against you. That's great. Piercing, you are now bleeding for 1d4 per round, which is on average an extra 5 damage, if you assume the 3-round combat thing. Blah. So we got like plus 5 damage. We've decided that prone. I've decided, I don't know, we've decided, but I've decided that prone and knocked back is about equivalent in a cool way. This is not more damage. You're just taking the same damage and dividing it. That's it. You're actually losing. Like, you're not losing damage, but it doesn't actually add anything. I'm surprised this isn't where you put the 19 to 20, because that would have at least given you an extra share of damage, which would put you on par with the piercing's bleeding ability. But there's a solution. The solution is when you roll a natural 20, you may you may hit one other target within your reach, within your movement, keep the same language, for an amount of damage equal to your proficiency bonus plus the relevant ability modifier. So for strength, it's for most attacks, it would be strength, sometimes dex. For warlocks, it'll be charisma when there's hexblades doing their thing. Whatever. But that makes it elegant, makes it beautiful. No more math. At low level, it's the same +5. At higher levels, it's slightly better than the piercing thing, but at higher levels, you're hitting more often and creatures are living longer, so the piercing might actually get better as levels that go up. I don't know. They have to find a way to end it, and it's action economy. It's a thing. But this, using your proficiency bonus plus ability modifier, just to one other target within range, gives you that path to another attack. Gives you that excuse to move forward. And we're not dealing with more mathematical complexity at the game table. So when someone rolls a 20, everyone's like, yeah, you're going to hit somebody else for 5 too. It's going to be great. As opposed to, oh, now we got to sit through Brady doing math. Great. So,
Came from one of my collaborators, replacing the widely
yeah, dismembering was
hated
bad. That just
dismembering
cutting
feature
off
I
player
originally
limbs
came
that
up
would,
with
what
in
much worse for the
slashing weapons.
players,
But for this new concept,
the
I decided to
monsters.
limit it
That's good.
to a number of creatures equal to your proficiency bonus, so your players can't just do
Yeah.
1 damage to 10
The
different
problem is
goblins.
you're still doing a lot of math. Like that's good, but you're still doing a lot of math. This way, one creature, you hit them, and that's fun, and you get to hit something else as well. And who knows, maybe that weak little minion might die or might get close enough, or maybe that's the little bit of damage the ranger needed to do more damage with their hunter ability, right? Like you can, there's so many reasons that it's good. I mean, both are good for those reasons, but this is good because it's all of that. Plus, I don't have to do any math. It's just proficiency bonus plus modifier. It's basically your attack modifier. You could just use your attack modifier. In fact, you know what? No. Let's just make it your attack modifier with a weapon damage to a nearby creature. Even better. Just thought of that now. Wow, this is good. Bob, we're doing this together, even though you're not here and probably going to be salty that I put this on your video.
And I really like this feature allowing you to use your movement speed during
Me
melee
too. Keep
crits
that.
because it
Keep that.
creates more of these dynamic combat sequences,
Yes.
similar to the bludgeoning feature. And this wording for ranged weapons, limiting it by range, not direction, works really well for one ranged slashing weapon.
So, you could limit this to a creature nearby the other creature, and then in the chakram, which is about, oh, here,
We're introducing the disc blade, aka chakram,
yeah, you
because
can
in
put
fantasy,
the
these things can
exception into the
sometimes
chakram
bounce from one target to another.
instead of.
This does mean you could
Again,
technically
it's
have a
an
thrown
example
hand
of
axe
putting the more
bouncing around,
complicated thing
but that's the
in
only
with the
other
rule
slashing
rather
weapon with
than
a range,
taking the
and
more
it's
complicated
cool.
thing and
So I think it's
putting it
fine.
where it belongs.
And if you're liking these ideas, remember
It's
to
another
give this
example of that, but
video a
that's okay.
thumbs up and share with a friend. But we've got one more optional feature to look at for all
This is
5e
good.
weapons.
One thing I liked about this video and why I wanted to do a video on this video is because it starts off strong, gets a little weaker, gets really weak, then ends strong, and I get to throw some shade at WoTC because they're guilty of some bad game design, as we'll see.
Sweeping attack. You can strike multiple targets with a single weapon attack. When your attack reduces a creature to 0 hit points, you can divert any remaining damage to an additional creature of your choice, provided you are proficient with the weapon and your initial attack roll also hits the chosen creature. For melee attacks, the new target must be within your reach without using any feat of movement.
I'd say
For
let him use
ranged
5 feet of
attacks,
movement.
the new target must be both in line with you and the initial target and within your weapon's normal range.
That's
If the
fair.
additional creature is reduced to 0 hit points, you can divert any remaining damage to another creature, and
Yep.
so on. This
Good.
is how my first group played D&D before we learned the rules, because everybody wants to do a spin move attack like Link from Legend of Zelda, but the regular D&D rules don't let you do that. There is a rule in the
Yep.
5e DMG
And this is
called
where there's bad game
cleaving
design.
through
He's going to
creatures,
talk about.
but it only works on an undamaged creature. Picture this. Goblin A and
Yep.
Goblin B have all 7 hit points. I hit Goblin A, deal 9 damage, Goblin A goes down, Goblin B takes the 2 remaining damage. Cool. But if Goblin A is already damaged and only has 1 hit point left, when I deal my 9 damage, I can't transfer any of that leftover to Goblin B. That doesn't make sense. And
You're
that
right.
DMG
You're right.
version only works for melee attacks, so you can't do
Yeah.
any cool.
Well, I think both of these things were on purpose, but it's bad game design on WotC's part because what WotC was trying to do was limit this to weaker creatures. So the idea is that if I can do enough damage to take you out from max to done in one hit, then I can cleave through you and hit the next one. So it works on like kobolds and goblins, but it won't work on like ogres, dragons, or Count Strahd von Zorovich, right? Like that was the idea. That's the idea. Did not execute it well because, as you pointed out, undamaged opponent, I can just cleave through him, no problem. Oh, he's only got 1 hit point left. I can't cleave through him. That weak goblin sputtering and dying next to his buddy, I can't just line that shot up to kill his friend as well. I guess you would hit the undamaged one and then hope to hit the damaged one again. But it's dumb. If you want to keep WoTC's original intention, you could say you could either just set a CR. If the creature's CR is 2 or lower, you can cleave through and hit the next one. Or you could set it based off of their hit dice, but that gets more difficult. And I think this is why WoTC went with the undamaged, because they didn't want to bring CR or other calculations into it. Maybe they weren't sure if they were keeping CR because it's useless anyway. So maybe they're gonna get rid of it. I don't know. So I don't know exactly why, but they went with the undamaged, and I think that was to just limit this to weaker creatures. And I think they even mentioned weaker creatures in the rule. I don't remember, and I don't feel like rewinding because the mouse is barely in reach. But that's what WotC decided. That's how WotC decided to do this. They could have done with CR. Hit dice I don't recommend. You could say if the CR is less than or equal to your proficiency bonus or the attacker's proficiency bonus, so that it goes up to CR6 creatures when you're like 18, 19, 20 level, whatever, whenever it gets to +6. Um, that would be good too if you want to keep it original. I do like adding the ranged weapons to it, even if you limit it to CR equal to or less than proficiency bonus. But if you want to let people cleave through Strahd to hit his minion when Strahd's dead, and even though it's kind of pointless at that point, and you're gonna whatever, then yeah, do this rule. This rule's good. It's good. I'm throwing. It's WotC that made the mistake here. But they were trying to do something specific, and they were trying to not overcomplicate the rule, but to limit it to weak creatures, and they just kind of failed. Because you're right. It's like, and yeah. So, but you could do proficiency bonuses, CR less than or equal to proficiency bonus. So at first level, you can take down CR2 creatures and cleave through them, and at higher levels, it goes up to 3, 4, whatever. That would be the easiest way to do it without adding way more needless complexity to the game. Or of course, you can just say, who cares what their CR is? Let's just do Bob's rule. Or you can combine them. You can do Bob's rule because it's got the ranged weapons and all that, and just say, hey, if the CR is, if you want to keep WotC's intentions here.
Legolas shots taking down like 3 orcs at once. But my version lets you be Link and Legolas, as
Yeah, it
long as
does.
you're
It,
proficient with
it,
the
it
weapon,
is
you don't
better
move,
as long as
and
you're
your
okay with
initial
doing it
attack
on a higher
roll
level.
hits those new targets. I really like it. So check out this other weapon
Pretty good.
house rule video and keep an eye out for my
You should
next
check.
weapon
You should
video,
check that out.
which
You
will
should check
go
out all of
over
his
a
videos.
bunch of new properties we have in the works. Thanks for your support, and keep building.
Yeah, you should that now. And yeah, this is where I say, if you want me to keep doing these reaction videos, if there's any videos you want me to react to, if there's any advice you have for me on how to get this channel off the ground, at the time of recording, I have 19 subscribers. If you want to encourage me, comment, like, subscribe. If you hit the bell, I will warn you that you're gonna get a lot of my live streaming of Skyrim. So maybe you don't want to hit the bell. Maybe you just want to like and subscribe. That might be the best. But definitely like, subscribe, throw a comment. If there's other videos you want me to react to, go for it. And Bob, if you want some vengeance on this response thing, I do have a bounded hit points video, which has terrible editing that you can just like tear into, and it would be fun to see that. To see somebody with like some clout in the community kind of tear apart my idea and just get more hits on that. So anyway, right, that's the end of my video. Hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, check out some other videos if you want to see an idiot, um, you know, break an AccuBow while playing Skyrim with it on a VR treadmill. There's videos for you. All right. Peace out, everybody.